Way of the Rose. We're here tonight at the very end of our 15-part series, Initiation into Mystery. Tonight we're at the 14th mystery.
The penultimate mystery, not the very end.
No,
Almost at the end.
we're at the fourth glorious mystery, the 14th mystery overall, and it's the mystery called the Assumption. And at this point, we've talked about, it's good to know what's happening. It's good to kind of know the meta narrative, and then we bring our imagination to bear. The really interesting thing about this mystery is we're not in any biblical story anymore when we get here. We are completely in the
We're
land.
off the grid.
We're off the grid. We're in folk legend, and the rosary ends and lets you know. You can know a lot about something about where it begins and where it ends. And where the rosary ends is in oral folk legend.
Yeah. A friend of mine who is a very talented reader of scripture, interpreter of scripture, said something really simple but profound. I've never forgotten. He said, if you want to know what the point of a story is, look at where it ends. Look at the place it gets to. And if you look at the narrative of the rosary, the place it gets to is the Assumption and the coronation.
An example of that, Clark and I are former English teachers, so you forgive us for a moment. You take two stories, Midsummer Night's Dream and Romeo and Juliet, and believe it or not, they begin in the same place. Those two stories begin with two lovers who aren't supposed to marry each other. And one of those stories ends with wedding and frivolity and laughter and your side splitting, and one of them ends with you weeping.
Yeah.
And one's a tragedy and one's a comedy. And we end the rosary with the Assumption and the coronation. So
instead of the Last Judgment, which was how the priest wanted to end it, because that's how the New Testament ends.
It doesn't. We're not going into Paul. We're not talking about the spread of the church.
Nope.
We're not going into any of the New Testament stuff here.
Yeah.
We're leaving the Gospels. We're leaving Scripture behind, and we're headed into folk legend. So where are we in folk legend? We're at the death of Mary. And legend has it that Mary doesn't die. She simply goes to sleep. And she is assumed into heaven, body and soul. Her body and soul are not separated. Right. She is assumed into heaven, body and soul, going asleep. Sometimes the Assumption is known as the Dormition of Mary. Dormition means the sleeping of Mary. And we'll talk about Sleeping Beauty in a little bit, because that's an oral folk story very connected to the Assumption and the Dormition. So often you'll see in pictures, there's Mary. She's asleep, dead, with all the apostles around.
Yeah.
And then you'll also see her going to heaven, surrounded by angels.
Lifted up by the angels, carried into heaven by them.
Interestingly, that's the mother of Jesus you see that happening with. Mary Magdalene, the other Mary we're working with, also has an Assumption into heaven. She is carried every day by the angels in the south of France into heaven to be fed.
Often by 7 angels. And the legend is that she, last years of her life, she took no sustenance but the bread of the hosts and wine. And the angels would carry her to heaven. How many times? 3 times a day?
3 times a day.
7 times a day. I can't remember. Multiple times a day to take the sacrament, right? And would carry her up and down.
So there's a lot of these legends overlap in really interesting ways. Now, Connor, let's go to the Sleeping Beauty. You're right. The Sleeping Beauty story, which comes from France, which comes where the Golden Legend comes from, which comes where all these legends of Mary Magdalene come from, tells a story of a princess who doesn't die, but goes to sleep for 100 years. And roses grow up around the castle. A thicket of roses. Briar roses. Yeah. And finally a prince comes after 100 years because he's heard tell of the princess. And he's the one who breaks through the roses, comes to her, kisses her, and wakes her up.
Right.
And So what's going on with this fairy tale, with this end of the rosary, the Dormition, the
I
Assumption?
have to admit that I was very puzzled for a long time about the Assumption. The coronation I got, most of the other mysteries I had some basic understanding of, but I wasn't raised Catholic, and so I didn't have a lot of the sort of, pious understandings of the Assumption. That's mostly what you get in Catholicism when it comes to the Assumption. It's mostly, response to it is mostly sentimental and pious. But so I was asking myself, what's really going on here? Like, what's really happening? And, the thing to do, especially when you're dealing with the last two mysteries, which, as Perdita pointed out, are not in the Bible, you have to turn to the folklore and to the art. And the art, Mary is always lifted up into heaven, right, by angels. She doesn't blast off like Jesus, right? You never see Jesus being carried up into heaven because the assumption is that he is rising on his own power, like a
His own
rocket. He's
steam.
ascending, right? He's ascending, not being assumed. But you see both in Mary and in Mary Magdalene them being carried up. There is something naturalistic about this process. It's collaborative. It is it's cooperative, right? It's something that happens very naturally. She's just lifted up. There's no nothing is forced about it. There's no will. Everything it's like the water vapor rising up into the heavens.
Another way I've thought about this mystery, and what I often do, particularly with the glorious mysteries, is I go to nature. Clark once said, I remember years ago, we were sitting right where we're sitting right now, and Clark said, aha, I got it. This was his Einstein moment. He said, it's ecology, not theology. And at the time, I was like, what are you talking about? And now it's all I can say is ecology, not theology.
I have better hair than Einstein.
it's, but anyway, let's look at ecology. So I asked myself in ecology, what's something that doesn't die, but just goes to sleep?
Hmm.
And I thought, what is the thing in nature that doesn't die but goes to sleep? Well, there's hibernation of animals, and
Hmm.
those, we live in black bear land. They go hibernate.
The woodchucks.
The woodchucks,
Yeah.
and we've been learning lately about grandma woodchuck, who's a kind of old Kali figure from the land around here. But one of the things that's both alive and dead is a seed.
Hmm.
If seed falls from a flower or falls from a tree and it falls to the ground, it's assumed by the ground. And it's not alive and it's not dead. It's going to grow into something, but it's in this dormant state until it gets
Hmm.
activated. And it is this kind of dormancy. And I think that there's something here about glory and about
Hmm.
miracles. Our Lady has often said all miracles are completely natural.
Yeah. Well, let's play with that for a minute because I think, it's worth coming at this from a lot of different angles. There's not just one interpretation of these events and these mysteries. I sometimes, am struck by the fact that people will often tell in the story of their coming to the Rosary or to Our Lady a period of dormition in their own lives, right?
Yes.
It's like they've been through these first 13 mysteries, which are all biblical. They know the story, they've had the religious indoctrination, they've had all this stuff. And, they frequently will lose track in one way or another. Not everybody. Certainly, there are a lot of people on Way of the Rose who, were brought up in families that are very devoted to Mary or to the Divine Feminine, and were celebrated. But quite a few lost touch with that, or they had it trained out of them, right? That awareness of the divine feminine. So
Right.
it's like she goes to sleep, right? And
Within
she's within
us.
us, but
She's a
she's like
seed
the seed
within
of,
our hearts.
yeah. But she doesn't die, right? She stays there until the moment comes when she's activated. Then something happens. A lot of people recently have told stories about smelling roses, right? They'll be in, some place where there couldn't possibly be roses. And suddenly the whole room will be filled with the scent of roses. And they'll say, what is that? Some person, sometimes a total stranger, will say, oh, that's the Virgin Mary.
Well, Clark tells an experience of this in Way of the Rose. He has this encounter with the Virgin of Guadalupe and Taos. He
Yeah.
comes back, he's on fire for Guadalupe. He learns the rosary, and it falls away.
Or the seed
The
falls.
seed
Seed,
falls.
seed
The
falls
seed
into,
falls into him,
yeah.
and things go dormant, and he's got other things to do, but the seed is there. I had the
Yeah.
same thing. I converted to Catholicism, and I write about the story. I left that, and I learned the Hail Mary after I left Catholicism,
Mm-hmm.
and I experienced it as a kind of revelation when I learned the Hail Mary completely on my own. And I fell away from me. I went off to Zen Buddhism and off to other things, but there it was. I knew the words. And I think the dormition, we see it in nature all around us. It's, we go
Yeah.
back to the
Yeah.
hibernation of the animals.
Right.
It's not like non-stop glory. The fourth mysteries, in all of the mysteries of the Rosary, if you overlap, you'll look, the first mysteries always take place in a garden. The third mysteries always involve a kind of crowning.
That's right.
The fourth mysteries always are a kind of dissonant note.
Mm.
So that in the joyous mysteries, you get in the presentation, in mid the joyous mysteries, Anna and Simeon say to Mary, a sword's going to pierce your
Yeah.
heart.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of sorrow. Then in the sorrowful mysteries, Jesus falls under the weight of the cross, and it's taken from him and for somebody else to carry.
Right.
So there is a momentary relief from suffering
Mm.
on the way to the cross. And then here with the glory, we're having, resurrection, ascension, descent of the
Right.
goddess, speaking in tongues, handling serpents. It's been fireworks display of miracles. And then suddenly there's dormancy.
Yeah. And death. I mean,
Yeah.
the people around her experience her as dying. Whether she
It,
dies or not, they experience the loss of her.
but she's like the earth that cannot die.
Yeah.
She becomes dormant. And winter is a period of
Mm.
dormancy, that there are seasons
Mm.
of dormancy.
Mm.
And if we go really macro and go into deep time, we're talking about a period of time in which the lady herself goes into dormancy.
Yeah.
During Christianity, the rise of the Christian empire, the rise of the
Patriarchy.
Holy Roman Empire,
Yeah.
the lady herself goes into a kind of dormancy.
Mm. Yeah. And there's a good 1,000 years there before the sort of the rise of the divine feminine in the Middle Ages. It takes about 1,000 years to really regain its foothold. I mean, it was what existed throughout the ancient world prior to the spread of Christianity, right? These religions, pagan religions, were all uh, primarily devoted to the Great Mother. Sometimes the Great Mother, the Great Father as well. There's always the Great Mother.
But then, so she resurges in the Middle Ages,
Mm-hmm.
and then she goes into dormancy again as we get the Reformation, the Counter Reformation, and the
Right.
rise of the
Yeah.
modern era.
Yeah.
Then around 1830,
Yeah.
as we write about in our book,
Not around 1830.
at
In
1830,
1830.
sorry, in 1830, she starts to reappear, and she starts
Yeah.
to become powerful again.
And she appears 500 times that the church doesn't validate or approve, but recognizes and makes note of 500 times since 1830. A very, very dramatic rise in the number of Marian apparitions
That are
and the
acknowledged.
real number is
Yeah.
is many, many, many times
And
more
we
than
see
that.
it in the world. She's, now is the hour of her return, which
Yeah.
is the title of Clark's newest book of poetry about her, which is, this is the moment. We
Mm.
feel it, the rise of the divine feminine. We feel something
Mm.
happening. She's not asleep anymore.
Well,
Who's the prince who kisses her? Who's
Mm.
the Shiva who comes to awaken Parvati?
Mm.
What does it mean to be, let's go back to Sleeping Beauty, because I think
Mm.
Sleeping Beauty is a very wise fairy tale.
Mm.
Just full disclosure, when I was a child, when I was in third grade, I was 9 years old. No, I did not want to be Sleeping Beauty. I wanted to be the fairy godmother. So I asked my mother to make me the fairy godmother outfit. So that was what I was when I was in Halloween. That was always my dream. I wanted to be an old grandmother.
Going to be the blue fairy.
The blue fairy,
The blue fairy.
the little blue
Yeah.
fairy godmother. Um, but yeah, but it's a wise story because it's
Mm.
about the prince coming, and it's about, we want the prince to come. We want the union of male and female energies. We're praying for the world to end with a wedding. and not with the death of the lovers.
Yeah.
We're praying for love to be
Mm.
rekindled. We're praying for Miriam and Yeshua to find each other again. We're praying for the remembrance of sexuality and marriage, and not for a world poised on the brink of
Yeah.
apocalypse.
Let's go back for just 1 second to the fact that these fourth mysteries, right? Like the presentation, right, and then the carrying of the cross, and then the Assumption. In all three of these, something is carried. Jesus is carried in the first one by Mary,
That's
right?
right.
And the second one, the cross is carried by Jesus, and then he's relieved of that burden and is carried for him, right, by Simon
Yeah.
of Caesarea. Simon is it?
Simon.
Simon. And then Mary is carried, assumed into heaven by the angels in the fourth. Our Lady makes things very, very simple. She does not set impossible tasks for us or impossible bars. You look at Jesus ascending into heaven and you think, I mean, if you're like me, you think maybe there's some people who think, oh yeah, I could totally do that. Most people think, no, if that's what's required, I'll never do that.
That's
I
the way I
can't
felt when I was
fly.
in
I
Zen.
can't. I can't. Yeah,
That was my entire experience
I'm
at Zen.
never going to be
I
perfectly
felt like I
enlightened.
cannot do that. I will not be enlightened. I do not understand koans.
Right. I'm
All
not
of this
going to
feels like the Emperor's New Clothes to me.
I'm not going to transcend the body. I'm not going to
No.
achieve total liberation or enlightenment. I'm not going to blast off into heaven. We're not going to be rescued by flying off to another planet and starting a human colony because climate change wrecks the planet. We look at, Jesus ascending, and it may be awe-inspiring, or it may think, oh, he must really truly be the Son of God. But most of us in our hearts think, I can't do that. You look at Mary being carried into heaven by the angels, and you think, oh, I could be carried, right? I was
Can we
carried
be
as a
carried?
child. And throughout my life, like Jesus, the cross becomes too heavy for him to carry, so he carries it forward. People help us. People carry us. I can be carried. I can be lifted up, right? So it's a very sweet mystery in a certain way because it shows us it models for us the fact that miracles are the most natural things of all.
And I would just like to go to Maureen O'Donnell says, who's the godmother? The bad fairy in the traditional Sleeping Beauty. And Maureen, what I would say is she's the crone energy. She comes in and she says, no, you're not going to die. You're just going to go to sleep.
Mm.
What she does is we're not going to let the goddess die in the world. We're not going to let the goddess leave the
Yeah,
world.
yeah,
We're not going to let the mother die. We're going to let her go to sleep. And we are going to awaken her and reawaken this energy.
right.
And she will return, you know, now. Now, here she is
Now.
when we need her. She'll come back. And what we want is, do we want the world to end with everyone dying, or do we want the world
Right.
to end with everyone getting married? Because those are the two choices in medieval stories. Everybody dies or everybody gets married. And one of the things that was wonderful about the St. Anne novena that we just
Mm.
did was to feel that life force in people's petitions. People
Yeah,
were praying for
yeah,
love,
yep.
love for their children, love for themselves, love they'd never thought was possible. And you felt a wellspring of hope.
Mm. Mm. And just for those people out there who love the Da Vinci Code, the there's every reason to believe that the legends about Mary Magdalene ascending into heaven, being carried by angels, are just as old as legends about Mary, and we don't even really know which one came first. And so when you look at the art, you're really looking at two figures superimposed over one another who may actually be the same figure, historically.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
then what's really been hidden has been the marriage of the divine, of the divine Lord and his lady. And what happens when we hide that marriage? What happens when we put an ascetical, asexual victim saint on a cross
Mm,
and make that the center of our religion?
that's right.
Sexual degradation up the
Right.
wazoo.
And just because, it's a point that we can't repeat often enough because it's really sort of the core of what we do on Way of the Rose, and, the understanding that we've come to and that we share. It's really important to realize that the rosary tweaks the story of the New Testament in decisive ways. And it's
Yeah.
right here that it happens. The story told by the New Testament is a linear story, all right? It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it ends with Apocalypse. It ends with Revelation. The priests wanted the rosary to end that way. The original last mysteries were all about the judgment, right? The Last Judgment. People rejected that idea, and they incorporated old stories, very old stories, going all the way back to the Proto-Evangelium James of Mary's coronation in heaven, right?
So they're saying that's not the story we're telling.
No,
That's not the story we're living by.
they said we're living within a circular story that's not linear and punitive, but circular and redemptive. And that circular pattern includes, and honors our life force and love and regeneration, right? And
And so to
sex.
pray in a
Yeah,
circle, I mean, look how often people talk about linearity throughout the
yeah,
day, progress, evolution, all these ideas of hierarchical linearity,
yeah,
ascension.
yeah.
We're not just getting
Growth economy.
the
Yeah,
growth economy
yeah.
better and better. We're gonna have a great awakening, and human beings are gonna level up. I'm so tired of it. How about we settle down and get tiny again?
Yeah. Don't hold
How
your breath.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's all of this kind of vertical
A friend of mine called
domination.
it. He tried to come up with a term for it that didn't really catch on, but I liked it. He called it infinition. That
Infinition.
was his term for it. Infinition. It was this myth of vertical ascent. That the point of human evolution, the point of life was basically to ascend, to go up and not come down. Even Jesus doesn't go up and not come down, right? He goes up in the ascension. The very next mystery is the descent of the Spirit.
Right.
What goes up comes down. And Mary, in the end, is
Queen of heaven
made Queen of Heaven
and
and of
of
earth.
earth.
So again, there's this
You go
movement, constant
Things go
movement.
up and down in nature, but they go in cycles
That's
up and
right.
down.
That's
If you
right.
look at the water. And what we're working with, I have to say, one of the things I love about the Zoom meetings is that everybody leads for a decade, and you
Yeah,
hear how people play with the prayers, and
it's
you,
amazing.
it's
It's
amazing. And
just
I
cracked
learned
it.
so much,
Yeah,
and it's so
completely
ecstatic, and
cracked it open
and
for
you
me.
can play in your head games about how you're going to change the prayers, and then you go listen to what people are doing with them,
And
and you just feel
and
wow.
honestly, I don't think anybody understands
But
all
let me get to my
15
point.
mysteries.
Let me get to my point.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So, one of the things I loved, I heard somebody say recently on a meeting was, um, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy seasons be done.
Mm,
Which I
mm,
loved. I hate the
mm.
word will. And I mean, I will was often meant, was a term in the early 1600s that actually meant sexual energy. um, what you will was so because again I'm a Shakespeare nerd. I can tell you the derivation of that meaning, but it's come to have the wrong meaning, which is like my will, your will, the battle of wills.
Right.
Like we're
Right.
toddlers with God,
Yeah.
and I love that idea of thinking of the Our Father as a prayer about the seasons. There are
Right.
seasons.
Yeah.
There are times when things are growing, and there's times when things are dormant.
Mm. It's a very ecologically wise poem. There's every reason to believe that it was really framed that way in the beginning for the people who first heard it.
Clark and I are right now reading the Gospels very ecologically, and we're kind of stunned that they're like
Oh,
these teachings on
unbelievable.
permaculture.
Yeah.
Another
Yeah.
book far down, far down the way. But yes. So the dormition is very interesting, and we all have dormitions, and we all have dormancy periods. We're gonna
Mm,
have time when our prayers feel fallow, when we don't feel like anything's happening.
mm,
We're
mm.
gonna have times where we feel like I don't really feel like praying the rosary. I don't know. I'm tired. I got to get off Facebook. I don't know. I think I'm gonna go off and do something else, and that's kind of natural, right? Like that's okay. Like oftentimes we forget that it's okay for things to lie fallow and for things to be still,
Mm.
right? And that we're going to all go through different rhythms. There are going to be times when we feel really like we're just blossoming and miracles are happening every minute, and there are going to be times when we feel like, oh, we're bulbs and it's wintertime.
Have you ever thought about the fact that it's a strange mystery in a certain way because there's so much action, right? There's the resurrection, there's a lot of drama, and then there's the ascension, a lot more drama, and then even more drama with the involving even more people, the descent of the Holy Spirit and the tongues of flame and all of the people,
Yeah.
everything that happens, and then suddenly you have this relatively quiet, almost somber event, right? It's a little bit of a lull before the end of the rosary. It's a little fall of the heart. And as Perdita said, the glorious mysteries are glorious, but this particular glorious mystery has a slight dampening, right? I mean,
Patrice calls it a pracation,
a
and it is kind
pracation.
of.
It
I
is.
love that
It's like a
term.
moment to catch your breath.
It is a moment to catch your breath, and it's a
Yeah.
moment to be still, and it's all right to be dormant. And it's, think about a culture where we're constant. I'm thinking of this so much because today I had a day of dormancy. I really, it's been 100 degrees here every day. We don't have air
Really,
conditioning,
gosh.
and for some reason, I just could not do anything today. If you've ever had a day like this,
I'm a little more perky because I've been drinking tons of
I was
water.
drinking plenty of water too, but I was just dormant today. And you forget how much we need dormancy.
Yeah.
Seeds need to be dormant, and there's some seeds that can be dormant a long time.
And
There's
we
seeds that can be dormant for 100 years.
need to trust, right? We need to trust. There's an element of trusting in the natural process. There's an element of trusting that we will be carried, that we will be carried along, moved along on the journey as we need to.
And sometimes we don't have to do so much. We can be carried into heaven. We don't have to try to get there ourselves. We can just let, that's what Clark has said, we'll be taken up there and fed and brought back when we need to be. There's a wonderful Buddhist teaching in Shin Buddhism, and it says there are two kinds of power, which is self power and other power, which I kind of like because it's not higher power, that higher ascension again. It's just self and other. And it really says, but all power is really other power. And we get very, in a modern culture, very caught up in self power.
Yeah.
What do I have to do? And sometimes, as in the dormition, the answer is nothing.
Right. Right.
The seed has to wait for the sun. It has to wait for the time. It has to wait. It has to wait for the seasons. It's so hard. Waiting can be very, very hard.
Mm.
We've all known, we've all felt suddenly after a period of dormancy, oh, everything's blooming again. And that's where we go next week,
The
which will be the
coronation.
coronation and will be our last mystery. And then we'll have completed our 15-part series.
Yeah.
They're up on the website if you want to see the earlier the videos that we've done.
Yeah.
And we are in conversation with Will Lytle about a book about the mysteries.
Yeah.
We want to do a really wild illustrated book about the
Yeah.
mysteries.
It's going to take some time because
And we got to have everybody's different voices. It's got
yeah,
to
it's
be
a really big. As I was saying earlier, no one, and I mean no one, understands, conclusively all 15 mysteries.
no one,
It
and that's
just,
why you want to go to a meeting because people share their thoughts about mysteries. I have never been to a
yeah,
meeting where I didn't experience revelations about the mysteries. Every single time.
yeah, and we're gearing up for another recitation of all 15 decades. Going to be on the 22nd
On the 22nd,
of
the Feast of the
August,
Coronation.
which is the ninth birthday of Way of the Rose.
We're going to do a big party. Everyone has to get their own cake.
Yeah, that's right.
And we'll think about how we're going to offer the celebration for the ninth birthday on
We
August
will
22nd.
recite a full rosary that day, a meeting where we recite a
And
full
we'll invite
rosary.
everybody to
Yeah,
share their thoughts about the
yeah,
mysteries.
yeah.
So thank you everyone so much. Stay
Thanks,
cool, stay
everybody.
safe.
All righty.
Good night.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.